So The Northman is a film that's been out for a few weeks now, and the director, Robert Eggers, said that he specifically wanted to reclaim the Viking Age from the far-right idiots and white supremacists who've tried to misuse it to further their own cause. And that's why I think he's done a really good job in making the two female characters porcelain-skinned blonde women with child-rearing as a main motivation. Oh, for fuck! So for those of you who haven't heard, the channel here is called The Welsh Viking, so all of the people asking if I was aware that The Northman had come out, am I aware that a film is coming out called The Northman, am I aware that there's a major, big-budget film coming out starring Ethan Hawke, Alexander Skarsgard, Nicole Kidman and Anya Taylor-Joy called The Northman, and it's set in the Viking Age? Yes. I love you guys. I am a big fan of Robert Eggers' films, and I'm a big fan of The Lighthouse, big fan of The Lighthouse, big fan of The Vavitch, and I was really excited to hear that he was making a Viking Age film. But unfortunately, because of how most films and series set in the Viking Age turn out, I was apprehensive because, especially with historical films, there's usually a lot of bigging up how historically accurate they are, and there's often a lot of disappointment when you go to see a movie or you see a TV show that is being touted as historically accurate, and it turns out that it's not. And especially with The Northman, the trailer having the mud-eating, topless berserker scenes set some alarm bells ringing. However, we're going to have to do a critique sandwich here, because there is some excellent stuff to look at in The Northman. We're going to do some really positive stuff, we're going to look at some of the stuff that could maybe have been done better, and then we're going to finish on a positive note, because who doesn't love finishing on a positive note? So, full disclosure, I took a notebook into the cinema with me when I went to see The Northman. This was a work trip, I intend to get the ticket price back off taxes, and it was one of the most enjoyable work trips I've ever been on. It is a film being directed by Robert Eggers, and Eggers loves his history. He is a big history buff. That's why in The Witch we have hand-finished, hand-sewn 17th century clothing that is pretty much spot on. That's why in The Lighthouse we have actual goldwork and embroidered lighthouse keepers' caps being worn by Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. Superb. That is why in The Northman, arguably, this film has gone to greater lengths than any other film or series set in the Viking Age that we have so far. We have hand-woven, plant-dyed cloth being used by the mile in this movie. A lot of the cast, if not all of the cast, are wearing extremely well-researched clothing, at least to a degree. We have things like the tablet weave that's in Nicole Kidman's hair. That is handmade, hand-dyed, plant-dyed with goldenrod tablet braid, made by somebody who is in a Facebook group that I'm in about historical tablet weaving, who makes museum replica tablet weave from the Viking Age. We even get a scene showing Nicole Kidman tablet weaving on screen. Like, tablet weaving is shown on screen. A period craft is being shown done on screen, which I think is fantastic, because tablet weaving is beautiful. We have things like an 80-year-old Polish man hand-weaving cloth to be used in this film that is then naturally dyed. No other film has done that. This film, hands down, by a league, is the best costumed, best propertied, best set designed, probably best interior lit, big-budget Viking Age film. Full stop. There's no but there. That is a statement that I'm happy to stand by. Superb effort. Some of the really nice details are what are the most impressive things. So in this shot we have here of the king, we have a diamond twill wool cloak lined with fur. Fur-lined cloaks are how people were using fur in this period. We know that. We have an example of a marmot fur-lined cloak from Mammon. This is a superb piece of kit. This is a piece of kit I would be very happy to see somebody of this status wearing on a living history encampment. It's closed with a penannular brooch. This is fantastic. The helmet is a lovely kingly helmet. It looks good. I can't say for certain if it's based off a specific find, but it looks like it's based off period examples, you know? Like, it's probably better than the helmet I've got behind me right here. It's really, really good. A lot of the kit in this movie is better than kit that I have. It's very good. It's very nice to have £90 million to spend on things like authentically clinker-built longships and diamond twill hand-woven cloaks. Brilliant. And the material culture in this movie is really what shines. We have lots of fantastic material culture in the film. So in this clip we have of Nicole Kidman brushing her hair. She's combing her hair with a bone comb, a replica of a find. We have hundreds of these types of bone comb found in the period, and this shows us aspects of the Viking Age and of Norse people that you don't see in a lot of other series. These are Norse people who are tablet weaving. These are Norse people who are crowned kings being treated as nobility and royalty by serfs, slaves, and peasants of their country. These are people practicing crafts. These are people who hang tapestries in their homes. They comb their hair before they get dressed in the morning. They're wearing linen layers underneath wool layers underneath outer layers. They're dressing. They're taking care of themselves. And yes, a lot of the colour is washed out of this film because it's brutal. But there's a lot of colourful kit in it. The kit, if it's actually shown in good lighting, like when you see behind the scenes photos, is really, really vibrant. And I think it's a shame that the colours have been washed out so much. I hope that there's a kind of more vibrant version out there that we can see, and it's not all just been lost in the digital ether. But some of the little bits, like the coin young Amleth wears, that's fantastic, because in this period, in the Viking Age, people are taking foreign coinage, Islamic coinage, ancient Roman coinage, punching holes in it and turning it into necklaces. So that's a lovely thing, a lovely detail. The arm rings that people are wearing, some of those are definitely replicas of real arm rings. The clothes look good. We have people wearing tunics, pants, turn shoes and leg wraps, and some cross-gartering. That's what the men are wearing. The women are wearing wool dresses, some of them are wearing apron dresses with tortoise brooches, and many of the tortoise brooches are replicas of real finds. I think that's an ambulance. In the scene that we have with Claudius, Fango, Fjolnir. Can we just decide on a name for this character from Amleth's Tale, please? Because if you keep changing the name, I'm just going to keep getting confused. So in this scene where Fjolnir kills his brother, he uses a really nice sword, a single-edged blade, something of a rarity, but absolutely something period, with a two-part pommel, with a riveted multi-piece handguard, and he's wearing Varafelder. And he's wearing this Varafeld that has been made by somebody who makes, again, reenactment costume and museum replicas of things like the Thorsberg trousers, and who makes this wool pile-woven fabric that was used as a major export in Viking Age and medieval Iceland. So this is actually a proper pile-woven cloak, and I was excited to see it in the trailer, and I was still excited to see it in the film. Shame about the lamella, but he's also wearing the ubiquitous Geirmundbu helmet, and that is one of the only helmets that we have from Northwest Europe from the Viking Age. His friends around him are wearing these felt masks, which, that's a lovely use of an artifact we don't know the purpose of. Maybe they were worn as, anonymous gang member masks to protect them whilst they were assassinating a king. Who the hell knows? Super cool little details like that. Really, really nice. When you go into a cinema and you see stuff like that, you're like, okay, you actually did put in the research that you claim you put in. That's super amazing. That's really cool. There are more little details here where, if you're a reenactor or you're someone who's researched this period, you see them on screen and you go, oh, I know what that artifact is. I know what that artifact is. That's really cool. And it's lovely to see them. There's some, fun things that aren't used in quite the right place, like Amleth's cloak clasps. They're actually leg-binding hooks, but they're still an identifiable artifact on screen. You see things like the sets, and the sets look, for the most part, really, really good. The long hall at the start of the movie is lit with a central hearth, a big central hearth, it's big enough to actually cast that warm golden light on everybody. And we have cresset lamps, hanging lamps, inside these buildings, which are decorated with tapestries. This is what medieval buildings are like. And comparing the look of the people, just compare this to, say, Vikings, or The Last Kingdom, and it's just leagues ahead of the costuming in any other big budget film, or TV series that we have, any of them. It is absolutely yards ahead, and it's what we would expect from Eggers. He does take liberties, and that was the bread of the critique sandwich. Now we're going to have some of the meat, and some of those liberties are tropier than others. And we have tropes like the motivation for the women's characters is previous trauma, and they deal with that with manipulating the men in the film. So, in some way or another, all of the women in the film are bad characters. But then, nobody in this film is likeable, and you can tell that it's meant to be a fantasy story. It's not meant to be a historical tale based on real life, because neither is the tale of Amleth. It is a 13th century fairy story, basically. And we know already that Robert Eggers was inspired by Saxo Grammaticus' story, and by William Shakespeare's retelling in Hamlet, and by the sagas, and it shows, because a lot of stuff is directly taken from the sagas. The clothing that you see certain people wearing, directly from the sagas. Even the Valkyrie, she's got a swan feather cloak. At one point they are mentioned as wearing swan garments, which he has taken with as being a swan feather lined cloak. Love that. The rest of her kit, garbage. She looks terrible, but still. the ground teeth with the dye in them, they never dyed them. There's no evidence of that. That is fiction. But certain other aspects are quite tropey, like the berserker scenes. The berserker gang is dealt with beautifully. Even in this negative section, I'm putting positive stuff in, because there are beautifully dealt with bits here. The berserker gang is directly taken from things like the Sutton Hoo helmet and the Torslunda plaques, where we have the guy with the silly hat and the spears. We've even got the topless dude in the furry trousers in the background at one point. That is directly taken off the Torslunda plaque. Are they bearskin trousers? Who the F knows? There's a great plaque from Torslunda where there's a guy wearing what looks like fur, stabbing a bear, whilst two bears are actually, like, sucking at his head. So, he doesn't do so well, but we don't know how the Berserker gang worked. We do not know how it worked. We don't know if the plaques here are referring to the same religious ceremony, but it's a fair interpretation of them to say that there's some kind of wolf-related or bear-related cult. At one point in the sagas, berserkers are called wolfskins and are called soldiers of Odin, warriors of Odin. Combine the two, make it a cult of Odin, where people dress up in furs and do a funky dance round a fire. Cool. Also from the sagas is the idea of the wolf shape, where we're told that they transform in their wolf shape, and that is taken in this movie as basically you get all hyped up and you make yourself feel like a wolf, and then you go rah, and then you fight people. Okay, fine. Yeah, they get hyped up before battle. They channel their wolf. Inside you are two wolves. They both howl and wear leather speedos. But then, unfortunately, it falls into the trope of berserkers were topless people who fought in wolfskins. Let's break that down. In the sagas, there is one mention of berserkers fighting unarmoured. That's it. Not shirtless, not nearly naked. Unarmoured. Without armour. Without byrnie. Without chainmail. That's what we got. There is one reference to them wearing wolf armour. We don't know what that means. Does it mean it's the magical protection that they take on by being in their wolf form? We don't know. Is it a wolf pelt? We don't know. What it probably isn't is leather speedos and a wolfskin. What's with the leather speedos, Robert? Why are there so many people wearing leather speedos? Why is the entire, spoilers, last few minutes of the film just two sweaty men, Dragon Ball Z screaming at each other, wearing leather speedos? What's with the leather undies? Like, the chafing. The entire raid scene with I'm just going to call them barbarians because, berserkers, yeah, right, was a little disappointing. The fact that he just easily climbs up a palisade, unhelmeted, without a shield, and doesn't just have a spear put directly through his head and into his spinal column. Nah, not for me. And I know that that's taken directly from the sagas because they're impervious to iron when they're in their wolf shape. And then afterwards they are completely shattered. Like, we get a scene of them all, like, completely exhausted directly from the sagas. Fine. We're using 13th century fairy tales as one of the sources for some of the more fantastical elements of the film. Cool. But, like, 5 protein-rich meals a day and mega gym workout Alexander Skarsgard in tiny pants is not a Viking Age warrior. It's ripped Hollywood dude in pants. Let's just admit that and stop trying to pretend that it means it's 100% accurate just because it's in a film where the director cares about history. I mean, we also have the scene with Björk as the seer, and she has chicken feet on her necklace just because Robert wanted them there. Yeah, so I know that they have amazing historical consultants. I know that they had Neil Price, who is a wonderful writer and an expert in his field. He's very good, he's at Uppsala. But this is still a film directed by Robert Eggers, who wants weird, fantastical, wooey-woo stuff included. The Mummy had some good historical consultants on the team. It doesn't make it 100% accurate. Let's stop pretending that it does. Just because you have them on the team doesn't mean that they are completely listened to. And yes, Dr. Price was listened to a great deal on this, but we still have a couple of disappointing things. Like the leather helmet. Why does the guy have a leather helmet? It just looks so bad. Ugh. So, leather speedos aside, most of what we see here is a good representation of not just the material culture, but the intangible stuff, the culture, if you like. And one of the things that's treated quite well is the blood involved in Old Norse religion. There is no holding back from the blood sacrifice in this movie. We have animal sacrifices, we have at least 2 horses getting beheaded in funeral rites. We know that horses were sacrificed, we know that animals were sacrificed, we know that human beings were being sacrificed. It's a bit disappointing that we have a funeral, spoilers, for Fjolnir's son, who is, I mean, at this point, barely a prince, that is meant to be the royal funeral from Ahmed ibn Fadlan's story, because that is the Rus. 2 things there. 1, the Rus are not the same as the Norse in this period. They are not the same as the Norse. They are ethnic Swedes who then travel east and are then heavily influenced by Khazar and Slavic culture, up to the point where, in the period this is happening in the film, it's basically unidentifiable. It's not the same culture. You can see bits of it here and there. It's not the same. Also, if they are using the same funeral rites as the Rus, why do we have so many mentions of the Rus as savages in this film? There are several mentions by Norse people of the Rus as savages, which doesn't make any sense. We have no evidence that that was the attitude that they had about the Rus or the Slavic people. We have no evidence that they really thought anybody was a savage in particular, especially if they have the same religious rites. That tends to be a big unifier culturally. So, if they're using the same funeral rites as the Rus, which they are, because the funeral scene in this film is directly taken from a description of a Rus funeral on the river Volga in the 10th century, why would they consider them savages? It's just little bits like that that just don't make sense. Like the idea that there is the thread of fate. Very common trope in lots of mythology. It's in Greek mythology, where the fates spin the thread of how your life's going to go. In Old Norse mythology, the Norns spin the thread. And then we have Anya Taylor-Joy's kind of character, Olga, saying, "Tell me, how does this work?" She's like, "Oh, the thread of fate? How does that work?" Well, you should know, because you literally have exactly the same thing in Slavic culture at this period. Like, you literally have that. Bjork's character is spinning thread with a distaff and drop spindle. Like, you absolutely know how that works. You know that. So, it doesn't quite work. We do have the slave girl's lament, "Lo do I see my father, lo do I see my master." That, incidentally, is a slave girl saying that. There are so many t-shirts with it on that's like, "This is a warrior's prayer." It's absolutely not. It's a sacrificed, enslaved young woman who is ritually sexually assaulted and then stabbed and drugged whilst being held down by large, sweaty Rus men. Like, that's what that is. I see my master, and he is surrounded by men and boy servants, and he is sitting in paradise, and paradise is green and beautiful, and I want to go to him. That's what that is. It's literally a legitimization of somebody being a slave. When you quote that, you're literally saying, "I am this person's slave and I want to be killed ritually at his funeral." There's no subtext there. That's what that is. So there are bits like that, but even those scenes where I'm watching them and I'm like, not, the other half of my brain is like, this is done really nicely. The material culture in this scene looks great. That shit for the funeral looks fantastic. Everybody's clothing here looks really nice. I'm really enjoying the fact that we have animal sacrifice on screen in a story that surrounds Old Norse religion and culture, because they would be animal sacrifice. We have stone statues and wooden statues of deities in separate buildings and sacred groves, as it would have been. When people are enslaved, we have conversations amongst the slavers saying, these guys are going to Constantinople, these guys are going up to the Volga, these guys are going to Iceland, and you think, yeah, that probably was happening. If you hadn't guessed, we're back into the bread now. So, little touches like that, where we have things like Heimir the Fool, played by Willem Dafoe, brilliantly treated, because a lot of jesters and fools in medieval courts were both somebody who says really near-the-knuckle, slightly insulting stuff to your guests to see how they'll react, which is exactly what he does, and also provides you with really good advice. It's what we have in Hamlet, it's what we have in Amleth, it's what we have in real medieval courts, and it's a good medieval storytelling trope that is translated into this movie really well. The fact that he is, spoilers, also basically the high priest of the kingdom, really cool touch. And the whole coming-of-age ceremony that we have at the start of the film. Yes, it's probably fantastical to a degree, but probably there was some kind of ritual of that kind. Not probably in the same way, by any means, but really fun that that's an aspect that we have of it, and that one part of it, almost a throwaway line, is, do not seek Seidr, do not seek the women's magic. Yes, love to see that mentioned. Love to see the fact that women's magic is considered a different thing. That's something that we have evidence for from sagas and from earlier texts. That's really nicely treated. And it's also interesting that we see the male priest who is a Seidr worker. He is effectively a male vulva, and it's a bit weird that he has a papier-mâché hat with a Vegvisir on it. Somebody's tried to convince me that it's just a rune from the period, a Bind rune. It's not. It's a 17th century Christian Icelandic stave. They had to make it into the film somewhere. I suspect that was just put in there purely to piss off pedantic people like me. Fair play, I like it if so. Irritating that it has to be on screen, but still. Things like the Barrow White sequence where we have, the Draugr, the zombie guy. That is like the Torslunda plaque. We have the boar-crested helmet, the ring-pommelled sword, exactly as represented. It's a shame that we have the splint armour on the lower arms and lower legs, because, yes, it existed. No, it didn't exist there. No, the guy buried in that mound probably wouldn't have had it. But, other than that, beautiful example of a ship burial under a mound. Very nice, thank you very much. Love that. Love the fact that that is also like a battle in the mind of Amleth, and really fun to see the little details like the different period swords being used in that way. It is an old sword. It has a ring pommel on it. That's an older thing. That is a migration period thing. Brilliant that we have this old dude from a couple of hundred years ago with this old kit. I'm like, it's so good. And it's where J.R.R. Tolkien gets it from and that kind of thing. It's just a lovely touch. So, is this a positive or a negative review? This is an honest review. There were some fantastic bits of material culture in this film. Some of the shots of Iceland were fabulous. The bit where we have the entire household on their horses and walking is so good. So well done. We have people wearing tablet weave. We have people wearing hand-dyed, hand-woven wool. We have riveted mail. Riveted mail. You do not see riveted chainmail shirts in films. This film has it. And it's got Ethan Hawke wearing it, which makes it even better. So, really, really beautiful touches. And I'll probably milk a couple more videos out of this film. I'm sure Robert won't mind. But, superb material culture. Tropey in parts, definitely. The mud-eating berserker thing. And his tunic around his waist. How do you do that? Does it have a zipper? Because the neckline should be pretty damn tight, and you certainly don't, step into your tunic like it's a maxi dress. That's not how they work, guys. Can we stop? So, I'm sure there are things that you guys will have spotted and want to mention in the comments section, and I know that most of them will be tiny little pedantic nitpicky things that I love people to spot, so please do mention any of the tiny pedantic nitpicky things that you didn't like, or any of the really tiny pedantic nitpicky things that you really did like the fact that at one point Nicole Kidman is wearing a cloak with the Oseberg tablet weave on it. The Oseberg pattern of the tablet weave appears in this film, and you do not notice stuff like that unless you have looked into this period, and when you spot things like that in films, really nice. So yeah, overall, the costuming is fantastic, leather helmets and leather speedos aside. Seriously, what is with the leather speedos? The heightened dialogue that we see, the heightened language and the formal language, hail king, hail, all that kind of stuff. I really love seeing stuff like that because it is very Eggers, but it is also very, it's medieval storytelling. It's the bard standing up and using formal language and the what of Anglo-Saxon storytelling and Norse storytelling, and even early medieval Welsh storytelling. A lot of that, hear me and hear my tale, am I not a bard with a blue cloak who has entertained many men, all of that kind of stuff. I love. I drink it up. Go and watch it if you like the idea of everything you've heard. If you don't like gratuitous violence, blood, gore, and literal on-screen seconds of sweaty men just screaming at each other, there's a lot of just men screaming at each other in this movie, and a lot of implausible stuff, maybe not for you, and overall, probably, if I had to sum it up, I'd say make it 45 minutes longer and cut out half the gore. There is a lot missing from the original Saxo Grammatica story of the 13th century, so if you're expecting things like Amleth going over to England, marrying the English princess, swapping the letters, all of the skullduggery that happens and the timings that happen, that doesn't happen. Lots of really cool stuff to look for, lots of really interesting stuff from the sagas, and as long as you go in bearing in mind that it is a fantasy story, based off a fantasy story, written 200 years after the end of the Viking Age and the Christianization of Iceland, blah, super good. Diolch yn fawr iawn, unwaith eto am ymuno. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined me. This is actually a reshoot of the video I was meant to be putting out, so it's probably going to be a day or two late. It may even come out on my birthday, so we shall see. And thank you for your patience. As some of you know, I've been moving to a new flat, so things are a little bit but diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of my lovely patrons, and thank you to everybody who's been sending me messages and keeping me going financially. I really do appreciate it. You guys are making it possible for me to do videos like this that take quite a long time to film and edit. So, diolch yn fawr iawn, unwaith eto. Tan tro nesa, till the next time, hwyl fawr am y tro. Bye for now. Robert, next time you make a film and you need a mediocre Welsh actor,